All right, we're heading to Brazil today, but this isn't your typical story about soccer or carnival. Nope. This is about how what's said in church on a Sunday morning is actually shaping the massive power struggle between the United States and China. Let's jump right in. So this is really the central question for us today. I mean, how on earth does religious faith in Brazil connect to this huge geopolitical rivalry between the US and China? At first glance, you'd think they're worlds apart, but as you're about to see, they are deeply, and I mean strategically, connected. This goes way beyond a local religious story. We're talking about global influence. And here's why that connection is so important. According to the research, Brazil has become an absolutely crucial stage, a key battleground, really, in this global ideological war. We're talking about a place where religion isn't just about what you personally believe. It's been transformed into a strategic tool, a way to project power and actually steer foreign policy. Okay, so before we dive into how the international players get involved, we first have to get our heads around just how massive this domestic religious bloc really is. And trust me, when you see the numbers, they are absolutely staggering. 44%. I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. 44%. That's the slice of Brazil's National Congress that is directly influenced by this Pentecostal voting bloc. We're not talking about a small interest group. This is a massive, highly coordinated political force that has a huge say in what becomes law in Brazil. And this chart really drives the point home. What you're looking at is the power of something called the Evangelical Parliamentary Front, or FPE. The best way to think about it is as a virtual political party. And as you can see, on major votes, this bloc often acts with more unity and, because of that, more power than many of the country's actual, official political parties. So how exactly do they wield all this influence? Well, it really comes down to a three-pronged approach. First, you've got the FPE. That's their organized front inside the government, coordinating legislation. Second, they have massive influence over mass media. We're talking about huge networks like Raid Record. And third, and this is so important, they have this incredible grassroots machine, a decentralized network that gets out the vote through thousands and thousands of local churches. All right, so that brings us to the big question, right? How did this incredibly powerful domestic force become a channel for foreign geopolitical games? Well, it wasn't by accident. The research points to a very clear, very deliberate playbook. And at the center of this playbook is an American organization called Capital Ministries. Now, their official mission is to set up Bible studies inside parliaments and legislators all over the world. The idea is to directly engage with lawmakers and political leaders to promote a very specific conservative agenda. And their method is actually pretty simple. It breaks down into 4 steps. First, they gain access to Congress, usually welcomed with open arms by local religious politicians. Second, they start hosting these weekly Bible studies right there in the halls of power. Third, in those meetings, they hand out materials that basically connect conservative political goals to religious teachings. And the final step? To use that influence to push for geopolitical alignment with American interests. So here's the absolute crucial point. When you look at the investigative reports, even at the group's own materials, the conclusion is pretty clear. These are not just simple prayer meetings. They're essentially political strategy sessions disguised as religious activity, a way to push a foreign-backed agenda under the cover of faith. And we're not talking about something subtle here. The sources showed this was an explicit strategy used by high-level officials, like former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He openly used this network to build an anti-China narrative. The whole idea was to frame it as this epic battle between a communist atheist China and the Judeo-Christian West. And the goal? To turn religious politicians in Brazil against their own country's #1 trade partner. And all of this pressure, this ideological campaign, it creates a massive problem for Brazil. The source material calls it an irreconcilable structural dilemma. Basically, it forces the country into a super high-stakes choice between ideology and pure economic reality. Let's put a number on that economic reality. $171 billion. That is the sheer value of Brazil's trade with China every year. So you see, China isn't just another trading partner. It is, by a huge margin, Brazil's most important economic lifeline, period. So this puts Brazil in a really, really tough spot. On the one hand, if they align with the US, they make this powerful evangelical bloc happy and strengthen their ties with the West. But on the other hand, being practical and keeping good relations with China is literally a matter of economic survival. I mean, picking ideology over pragmatism could be completely disastrous for their economy. But just when you think you've got the picture figured out, there's a twist. As powerful as this evangelical bloc is, the ground is actually starting to shift underneath it. This situation is anything but static. Let's take a look at the demographic data to see what's happening. For decades, the narrative was just one of explosive growth. It seemed completely unstoppable. I mean, look at this. From just 9% of the population in 1991, they skyrocketed to over 22% by 2010. This wasn't just a small change. It completely reshaped the entire social and political fabric of Brazil. However, the most recent data shows that something has dramatically changed. That rocket ship has started to slow down. If you compare the rate of growth from 2000 to 2010 with the period after, you see a 43% slowdown. Now, to be clear, the movement is still growing, but that phase of just explosive runaway growth, yeah, that looks like it's over. So the big question is, why? What's behind this slowdown? Well, the analysis points to three main things happening all at once. First, there's a lot of internal fighting. The movement is fragmenting, with major leaders publicly feuding, which shatters that image of perfect unity. Second, you just hit a point of market saturation. After growing so fast for so long, there are fewer new people to convert. And third, and this is a big one, you have the rise of the no-religion demographic. More and more Brazilians are identifying as secular, and that creates a whole new dynamic. And all of this leads to a fascinating projection for the year 2030. What the data suggests is nothing less than a historic shift in Brazil's identity. We're looking at a future where Catholics and evangelicals are in a virtual dead heat, both at around 39%. But the real story might be that third slice. The no-religion group is on track to become a massive social and political force, and that is going to completely change the game. So if there's one big thing to take away from all of this, it's that this is a complex story where two things are true at the exact same time. On one hand, the evangelical movement in Brazil is an authentic, powerful, homegrown force with deep, real roots. But on the other hand, it's also a force that has been very clearly identified and used, amplified even, by foreign powers as a tool for their own geopolitical games. You really can't grasp what's happening unless you hold both of those truths in your head. And all of this leaves us with one final and very challenging question for Brazil. When a foreign political agenda comes wrapped in the language of faith, how do you defend your country's national interests without looking like you're attacking the deeply personal religious beliefs of millions of your own people? That right there is the incredibly difficult tightrope that Brazil is going to have to walk for years to come.